So here we are, my main man Rolfe. You want to talk about the Godfather? This is the Godfather of steel here in Hamilton. Certainly, we joke, you're here. You will never catch Rolfe without a flyer. You want to talk about popular education? Rolfe has the ability to take very complex issues, very complex trade deals, and make it accessible to the general public so they recognize the threat that's before them. Rolfe, talk about what's on your flyer today.
So the first thing, I appreciate what you said about it, because what happens with the media and all this is they try to confuse everyone. So they complicate things and they make it so no one can really understand what's happening. Then the other thing they try to do is they want you to forget about your history. So as far as the flyer today, it's about NAFTA and these trade deals. 30 years ago, we were campaigning, and everyone except the conservatives were campaigning against the free trade agreement. And when Mulrooney got elected the second time, way more people voted against him, and it was over the free trade. And then the Liberals at that time were opposing it, and they said if they're elected, they're going to get rid of the free trade agreement. So then the Chrétien got elected, and then it was NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, but then they never got rid of it. The same as with the GST. They also campaigned they were going to get rid of that. So now we're stuck, and they want us to believe that these negotiations that are going on, that it's something that it isn't. So it's supposed to be, now it's these governments are there looking after the interests of the people or creating jobs. When reality is they have turned the whole North America into a playground for these big monopolies. And that's what they're having a fight amongst themselves over how to best accomplish that. But of course they can't come out and say that. So they say, oh, we're all interested in jobs, and which is just phony. And what's happened from the last 30 years, North America has now been integrated into the U.S. So not just on trade, it's the military, into the commerce, the whole thing is just, and so they're working out the details of that. So in my opinion, that's not in the interest of the workers. And it's interesting that the farmers, they're quite opposed to this, because they see and they live it every day, the negative consequences. So what's needed is the workers have to figure out what their interests are here.
So here's something that I think is so important, and there's, I'll say, very few people that I know who could probably break this down for people. When we watch the news and we see people like Donald Trump attacking NAFTA, and then we see even centrist liberals, neoliberals, corporatists saying, look, look, socialists, look, leftists, you guys actually agree with Trump. What's the nuance there? How do people make the distinction between the reasons why Trump wants out of NAFTA and the reasons why the average worker wants out of NAFTA?
Yeah, so the nuance there is there's no discussion about what is actually in the interest of the workers. So that's what our problem is. So then you're reduced to, like I said, there's this fight amongst these big industrialists, these multinationals, about what they want to benefit them, and we're supposed to pick sides. So, and it's never, and unfortunately it's one of the problems with the unions is they don't raise that the workers should have their own stand on this, and what do we want. So you don't have that. So it's either line up behind this one or that one, line up behind Trump or line up behind Trudeau or line up behind but it's not that's not in our interest, in my view. Like, we have the experience, like we had U.S. Steel on us. Well, that should be a wonderful thing, right? We're part of the North American steel industry, and they wrecked us. They were able to do it, and there wasn't any government in Canada that stood up against that. So that's what they've created now, that whatever these monopolies want to do is okay. And the people are out, that we have no role to play in it. So that's what, we're trying to create.
So important. And it's interesting that you talk about that, because I agree. I see when you talk about the gutting of these agreements, in that they're also trying to gut labor rights and environmental rights in a way that
I'll give you an example, like, because we go a lot with our own experience. So they say, oh, they're out there fighting for labor rights. Well, what did U.S. Steel do with us? They locked us out for 11 months to get what they wanted, that the next generation isn't in the pension plan and that the indexing is gone. So normally...
What does that mean? So part of the challenge that I have, and I'm always going back to this kind of Paulo Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed, taking complex information and making it so that everybody can understand. Yeah. What's the importance of an indexed pension? Why does that matter?
Because the cost of living, you go up. So literally our analysis of it was every year we lose 2% of our money.
Yes.
Of our pension. So in 10 years, you've lost 20%. If you happen to live 20 years on pension, you've lost almost half your pension. So, of course, it creeps up. So that's why long time ago, workers figured the wages and their pension should be indexed. So in order to get rid of that, they were able to lock us out for 11 months and just ship the steel up from the States. So now what did our labor rights, how did they defend us there? And literally, if we turned it down, we would have been like manna, my view.
Yep.
And 4 years later, you're still locked out.
Right.
And so all the labor, and manna is another example. You know, these multinationals, this is what they can do. So they can talk, oh, we want labor standards, but then the reality on the ground is everything they're doing is to take that away. That the workers don't have any rights.
And, you know, so the pension piece is so important. We're talking about that here in Hamilton. We have fair wage policies. And the fair wage policies mean that, for instance, and I'll use this as an example, if ATU, the Allied Transit Union, were to take on the new LRT under a private company, they would have successor rights that would give them the privilege to have matching wages. But what has not been made clear, what has not been put down on paper, is the benefits and the pension. So earlier we were talking to Malcolm and Anthony about pharmacare, about the cost of pharmaceuticals and the cost of medicine. So if you don't have benefits, and coming from an entrepreneurial side, I spent 10 years of my life without dental care, without pharmacare, without any kind of benefits package that would protect me. Which is why if we talk about a universal health care, we need to talk about a universal pharmacare. They're hand in hand. Absent of that, you need to have benefits. Let's talk about the importance for your workers when CCAA came through and gutted the pensions, what that meant in real dollars for the average person. Can you give us an example?
Yeah, no, the point is, see, the benefits is an interesting question because some people don't need them. You know, they're not sick, they're not this, they're not that, you know, so then it says, well, it's not that big a deal. But then if you need it,
that's right,
then it's huge, and you can't. I mean, some people, they take 20 different pills. So
this is hundreds of dollars. When you say that,
it's thousands.
It's important for people watching to understand what that means. Is that if you're on a fixed income, if you're a pensioner and you're getting your average pension, if you were to just say that, what would be an average pension?
Let's say $1,500 or $2,000.
Let's call it $2,000 and be generous, right? You have that pension. We already know what the mortgages cost, what the gas costs, what insurance costs, all those costs of living. You get to the end of the month now, and all of a sudden you got to pay $400 or $500 for pills. Yeah. You got to make a real choice between rent, food, or your health care.
Yes, and when you're at the most vulnerable. Right?
And when you're at the most vulnerable.
Really sick. Now, the other thing I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the living wage. Imagine this is the discussion you have to have, is someone has a full-time job, and they should be paid enough to make a living? Oh my God, how outrageous. How can you even ask that?
That's disgusting.
This is just terrible. And you're like, really? We're having that you got this job and you can't even live on it? And you gotta have 2 jobs or 3, whatever you're like, and to raise that is, well, you are such a threat to society here that it's amazing like that can even be an issue.
And it's an issue during a time when the income inequality between the working class and management and the CEOs, if we were to see what those dividends look like, if we were to see what those stock options look like, all the corporate benefits, the golden handshakes, the lining of the corporate pocket looks like, it's on the back of workers. At the end of the day, look, if Tim Hortons and McDonald's can't afford to pay a living wage, then they shouldn't be in business. It's just it. And this idea that, it's just teenagers who are just making some extra money is ridiculous. If you're a kid and you're working full time to pay for university and those rising costs, you need that $15. But the reality is the largest percentage of minimum wage workers are women and elderly. Folks who went their lives without a pension, therefore don't have a retirement plan, so now they're forced to work these service jobs at inadequate, substandard wages.
Yeah, and they're making it like, oh, we have to have a discussion over this. That someone should have a wage that they can live on? Like, really? Are we really having that?
And the thing that I find fascinating about that is those same people are the ones who bemoan and decry folks who are on Ontario Works or ODSP. And, the idea that in Ontario Works, if you were to get a little part-time job, the first thing the government do would claw that back. So if you're making $700, if you're getting $700 a month from Ontario Works and you want to get a little part-time job, first thing the government's do is going to claw that back. So there's no incentive for those folks to take legitimate jobs and to try to transition out of Ontario Works when we know that the housing costs are punitive. It's a form of what I would say economic violence.
The hydro, how about the gas now going up, right?
Right.
Because of that's so anyway,
so there's a myriad. We could talk all day. In fact, I have a series called CivX where I try to take these complex issues and connect people to the process of government. I feel like you and I have probably an hour and a half segment on that. I'm going to let you be back at it. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the work you do. We're down here at Labor Day. Rolfe Gerstenberger, past president of 1005. Thank you, brother. Man, he gets me fired up. And when I talk about, people who've been in it for a long time, Rolfe has been a constant in this city fighting for workers' rights. And the thing that we got to always recognize is that when our labor unions fight for rights, it's often applied to everybody. So, if you talk about the 40-hour work week, it's unions. You talk about, having even just a minimum wage. If corporations had their way, we'd still have child labor. That's, we'd still have these things. Don't think that they just evolve out of it. If they had their way, they'd have all of that. So here we are down here on James Street North now. I'm going to flip this around. And we're just going to get a sense. All these workers, we got 1005, Solidarity Brothers at 1005.
Hey, you want something? I'll let you know some stuff.
Okay.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey, brother. We'll try to catch up. We're still with 1005. You can see how deep this union runs. Hey!